All right, all right, all right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Well, hello and welcome to the Actual Anarchy podcast. This is our Tax Day special. This is coming out right before the April 15th, which is the day of theft. And we're, of course, going to be talking about the guy who redistributed goods stolen from the rich and gave it to the poor. It's Robin Hood, or at least that's the commonly known version of the tale these days. This is episode, 228 of the show. You can find the show notes more at actualanarchy.com/228. And Robert and I from the Actual Anarchy podcast here, we're just on Keith Knight's Don't Tread on Anyone, talking about 9 libertarian ANCAP movies, whether they knew it or not. And this was one of my picks. Now, I was wrong because this particular version of the movie is sort of a reimagining of an origin story. So it doesn't really get into the, the cultural norm or version of it. Like the
classic
Disney
tale with the sheriff of Nottingham, and he's like, none of that. The sheriff of Nottingham appears in this movie, but like barely,
ancillary.
Doesn't do anything.
Yeah, he attempts a rape or two, but beyond that,
like any good sheriff, you're gonna get in a couple rapes, but he doesn't do any of the classic. I'm gonna go get you, Robin Hood, until the very, very end, like the last scene of the movie.
Right. So to be fair, on the Keith Knight show, I had not yet seen this, and so I was referring to the Robin Hood of Prince of Thieves or Disney with the Fox versions, where he's taking from the rich and giving to the poor. But the true origin of the story is that he was taking from the tax collector and giving back to the people that were stolen from. And so that's kind of the premise that I was going on as I brought up this movie.
And there's one scene in this film where he kind of does that. There's some grain that he redirects back to the growers.
Exactly, yes. And of course, we'll get into that when we get into last night's part of the show. We have a great guest who back in the day used to nearly be a sheriff of Nottingham himself, and he's one of the only kind of cops that I like, the kind that quit. So we're going to introduce him in just a few moments. But Robert, how are things going with you? I know that you have taken a bit of a bit of a trip. You're in a different location now. Are you doing well? And did you find travel being restrictive in any way, or was that all fine?
So you may notice, for those watching the video, I am in a different location. I have this magnificent headboard behind me, which signifies that I am, yes, on a luxurious queen or twin-size bed of some kind. It's quite decadent, and it's because I am visiting my father for a few days. I have been threatening to interview him about his life for the past, say, 8 months now, and I'm finally getting around to doing this. It took a week off of work, and I came down here to and I just finished up the interview about an hour before we started doing this podcast. So interview went really well. He told me all kinds of fun stories. I think it's going to be a real pleasure to listen to for future generations, anybody who's curious about him in the family. I don't think anybody outside of the family, but he was kind of a popular figure in the town growing up where we grew up. So maybe some people, some local Stanwoodians would want to watch it. Maybe, who knows? But the drive here was through dilapidated destroyed, bombed out third world town after dilapidated, bombed out third world town. And in between those dilapidated third world bombed out towns were either burned out forest or just prairie, just endless plateaus and prairies. Eastern Washington is not the most economically vibrant place you've ever been. And I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised when I arrived at this little town where Pop lives, and it's actually looks like a quaint little, like Leave It to Beaver type town. It's actually doing all right. So,
well, yeah, you mentioned the name of it, and I actually looked it up because I was like, I haven't heard of this place. And for some reason, I thought that he was in Montana. And so I was expecting, when I did the search.
Yeah, he was in Montana like 10 years ago.
So I'll take it. I was not brought up in the interview where he remembered me fondly.
No, you were not mentioned.
Okay.
Maybe I will mention you in my life interview.
Thank you. When after we restore the boat, we are going to restore a boat on the beach in Mexico, and we're still going to do this show.
That's right. And then maybe some young whippersnapper will interview me about my life story, and I'll mention this one guy I knew one time. I did a podcast with him.
This total old man jackass with Kirkland signature jeans and white New Balance shoes.
And the white New Balances. Yeah.
Actually, I don't have those. I'm not dad cool. I'm not that dad cool. I'm just regular dad cool.
That's a bold statement saying it's cool, but all right.
That's right. Well, let's bring on someone who's actually dad cool. And in some ways, even though he's younger than us, has wisdom beyond our years. And we're going to introduce him on the Last Nighters portion of the show right after this. Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Paul Johnson, and we are the Last Nighters. You can find us on the Liberty Movement's YouTube channel. You can also find this episode on Ridley Scott's unrated director's cut of Robin Hood starring Russell Crowe at lastnighters.com/171. Now, this is our tax day episode. The dreaded April 15th is right around the corner, and I was speaking with my tax accountant the other day, and apparently because of changes due to the new administration that occurred in late December, and then also again, I think in February, they've pushed the due date to May, but we're still going with the traditional day. And so we're, of course, talking about the Robin Hood of taking from the tax collector and giving back to the community that it's stolen from. And our guest is Mike T. of the Battle for Liberty podcast. It's been a podcast that's been on hiatus for a few years now, but it was really well done, and he's a good guy. He actually had us on, Robert and I on, years ago, and I can't believe he continued the show after that. If it were me, I would have cut it out right after he and I were on, as that would have been,
ending it on a high note.
Ending on a high note, yes. But welcome back, Mike. We've been talking about doing this show with you for a very long time, like 2 or 3 years, and we finally have got it together. So one question I have to you is, why did you bring this up a couple years ago? And what do you got planned for the future? Do you have any other, do you have a show in mind that you want to get back out there, or like how are you preparing for the economic collapse, or are you planning on doing anything to promote liberty other than the non-masking ways, which we were talking about in the pre-show bonus content, which I totally applaud. I think that's a very bold move. It's a bolder move than I actually want to do, because I'm like, just leave me alone, people. Don't fucking mess with me. I'll wear your fucking mask like way out here. Like, I don't know if people can see this video. It's like so loose. But anyway, welcome back, Mike. This is like the most ham-fisted intro I've ever done. But thanks for coming back.
Wow. Yeah. A lot of questions there. First of all, it's great to be here. Really appreciative of the invite. And okay, so you asked a whole bunch of questions there. Let me see if I can get to all of them. The first one was, why did I pick this movie? Well, I picked it because a long time ago when I watched it, my wife and I, before we were married, actually saw this in the movie theater. And we watched it. And at the time, both of us could be described as your typical big R Republican types. And it was one of those moments where we watched the movie and we left the theater and we kind of looked at each other and said, does Hollywood know that they just made that movie? Like, do they understand the message that they just sent with that movie? So this was, pretty early in the genesis of my turn away from, big R Republicanism, which was a form of minarchism, over towards a more anarchist point of view. And it was amazing to me that Hollywood, especially the likes of, Russell Crowe and some of the other big names that are in this movie, unknowingly, I believe, sent the message that, the government is the one that steals from you. And contrary to the caricature of Robin Hood, as we've come to know him, stealing from the evil rich and giving to the poor, really, in this movie, what Robin Hood did was steal back the tax money that was stolen from the common citizenry. And so that struck me even back, over a decade ago when this movie was in theaters. And so later in life, when I started a podcast about anarchy and voluntarism and other such political philosophy, and then learned of your show addressing these topics through movie reviews, well, it was a natural. So yeah, so that was question number one. I don't remember what the other questions were. Oh, do I have anything upcoming? No, I don't. I have 5 children, all under the age of 7. This is why I no longer podcast. I would love to continue doing it. I just don't have the time. I have a job where I travel around the country. About 90% I'm on the road. And with 5 children at home, there's literally no time. I had to schedule this podcasting time as one of my kind of, guy nights, and I'm very happy to do it. Thrilled to be here. But the amount of time I was putting into podcasting was really starting to take away from my ability to properly pay attention to my wife and my children. And I just had to make the decision that I couldn't do that anymore. So when my kids grow up, oh boy, would I love to get back into podcasting, but we'll just have to see where my life is then.
Yeah, I feel you there. My kids get sad when it's Tuesday night or whenever we do a podcast, because we're going to miss my dad hug and all this. And so tonight I was like, okay, guys, so here's your dad hug now at 5:50. And the good news is I don't have to do my next show until next Thursday. So there's 9 days before I do the next one. But I think that this is just a testament to time preference, right? Because you're investing now in raising your kids so that instead of one podcast, now there's going to be 5 20 years from now. There's going to be 5 anarchist podcasts.
That's right. That's the hope, right? I think I could either have a job where I travel or I could podcast, but I can't do both. So right now it's not, honestly, I'd pick podcasting if it would bring in the money to support the family, but it doesn't. Spoiler alert.
Right.
So I travel for my job to take care of my family. And when I do get home, I have precious little time and I need to spend it with my family. So I don't do the podcast anymore. As much as I loved it, it really was a joy to do it.
Yeah, well, I thought that you did a great job. And during our pre-show content, which is available for our Patreon supporters, go to lastnighters.com/Patreon. We actually get into some of the content that you covered extensively in your show. And we talked about the Bill of Rights and whether it applies to the individual states or not. We had a little bit of a back and forth on that. And I think that people will find that interesting. Granted, I think that you can look within the argument, within the constraints, and see it one way. And then the other way is, well, let's just not accept those constraints and see it a totally different way. And I think that we all agree in both of those regards. So if people, I'm just leaving teasers out here. Go to lastnighters.com/Patreon. People can check that out. It's nearly an hour of just great bonus content. It's gonna be way better than the show here. Pretty sure.
It was pretty great. Go to his site he just mentioned and become a patron.
Yeah, ringing endorsement. Thank you. Thanks. All right,
I'm great at this.
we'll give you a kickback.
I'm a little out of practice.
All right. So one of the things we do to make this a little bit easier is we start off with the Google description, and that helps us kick off what we're going to be discussing. So here we are with the old Google description. It is Robin Hood, a 2010 film by Ridley Scott. Now, the regular version is PG-13, but the extended unrated cut is not rated is not rated. So it's like R+. It's like intense. There's more blood and more violence and more gore. This, of course, stars Russell Crowe and Cate Blanchett and William Hurt, among others. And got a 6.6 on IMDb, 43% Rotten Tomatoes. Vudu gave it 4.2 out of 5, and on Google, 84% of Google users liked it. Now, these reviews are probably related to the theatrical cut, which I did not watch, and is probably a little bit less coherent. But even this more fuller version that Robert and I watched, I'm not sure which one you saw, Mike, there's a lot going on, and it is confusing. There's so many moving pieces. But the description is, after the death of Richard the Lionhearted, a skilled archer named Robin Longstride, played by Russell Crowe, travels to Nottingham, where villagers suffer under a despotic sheriff and crippling taxation. He meets and falls in love with a spirited widow, Marion, played by Cate Blanchett. Although she is skeptical of his motives, hoping to win her heart and save the village, Robin gathers a band of warriors to fight corruption in Nottingham, little knowing that they will soon be fighting to save England itself. This came out on May 14th, 2010, directed by Ridley Scott. Had a box office of $321.7 million on a budget of $135, which means it probably about broke even when you consider all the marketing and other things that go into these things. But it's one of those movies that, Robert, I think I don't remember very much about this movie back when it came out, and so it didn't really seem to have a lasting impression. But I'm curious what your take is on the Google description and your opening salvo, please.
Well, do we know how much the director's cut added, like time-wise? You have any idea?
It was probably 10 to 12 minutes, I think.
Really? That's it, huh? Okay. Because it did seem quite...
Oh, wait, I've got it here. Runtime, 140 minutes, and then 131 minutes, and then 156 for the director's cut.
Okay, so 15 more minutes, right?
Something like that. Okay.
So I didn't see a whole lot more gore and violence there than I recall. But, I mean, this movie very much felt like Ridley Scott wanted to make a medieval epic, and he took as inspiration the story of Robin Hood and told an origin story. It is definitely not, like you said, it's not the material covered in other Robin Hood stories where the Sheriff of Nottingham, even in your description, though it mentions the Sheriff of Nottingham, he's barely in this film. He talks to Maid Marion a couple times. He tries to take a ram, and he does a few other things, but he's really not the focus. He's kind of just like a little tiny side character, and he's almost played off as a joke because he really kind of is compared to all these great big powers at play, and he's just this like small time thug lording over this little community. But the story itself is quite fun. I mean, I think it definitely plays into some real history. I don't know if the story of Robin Hood is necessarily set during the time of Richard the Lionhearted, but Richard the Lionhearted was definitely a real person, and he definitely did go on crusades, and he invaded France, and they were very costly, and all those things. I believe he also died in France, so that could also be historically accurate. I'm sure one of you guys can confirm or deny that. But yeah, it's a medieval epic with Russell Crowe kind of toward the end of his powers. I would say he was a young rising star in Gladiator. He was at the height of his powers in like Master and Commander, and maybe that one where A Beautiful Mind. But then in this movie, he's getting a little bit older. He's not like the young, sexy heartthrob hunk guy. He's kind of the older dad bod dude, which I know you guys can really identify with. So that's like
the shirtless scene. He's pretty buff in that.
oh, he's buff, but he's not like the young, ripped Russell Crowe, right?
Okay, he's a little doughy.
Yeah, a little smooth, a little doughy. He's a little Pillsbury action in his bod. But not to say he's not. He's still fit. I mean, he's still in good shape. You can clearly tell, but he's not what he was. Anyway.
Yeah, well, just on a side note, he was apparently the oldest actor to have played Robin Hood in any screen adaptation. He was 45 years old at the time.
And he looks great for 45. But it's tough when you are... I mean, Maid Marion in the story is like this young lady, right? Maid Marion. And in this, she's like this old widow. She's like 50, right? I mean, in real medieval times, she would not be like any kind of attractive for anybody to marry at that point.
Yeah, wasn't the average age like 35, like the average age of death or lifespan at the time?
Yeah, I mean, if she wasn't married at 25, she's like an old maid. So at this movie, she's a grandmother a couple times over, and nobody's considering jumping into that potato sack. But anyway, the movie itself is, it's fanciful. It suffers from quite a few Hollywood tropes. There's like a big final battle at the end with the hero and the villains. And...
I got issues with that.
Oh yeah, me too. I mean, the last scene was like, okay, Ridley Scott watched Saving Private Ryan, and he really wanted 1200s Norman invasion style
Higgins with the PT boats.
With the Higgins boats. Dropping off the soldiers in a dramatic fashion, because that would have happened. No, it was absolutely ridiculous in that sense. And then, of course, yeah, I mean, just all the tropes, even all the anyway, we'll get into it, but it's still a pretty dang good movie, if a bit paint by the numbers, I'll say that. And there are quite a few plot points. The overall message seemed to be the father's message of the story, which I take some issue with. Although I thought that Russell Crowe's speech to the king at the end was actually fairly decent, short from being an anarchist message. It was at least fairly libertarian. Like, you're not going to be a tyrant to us. We'll actually have rights. Seems like a decent message for the most part, but yeah, overall pretty strong.
I like the every Englishman's home is a castle. Like, we're all kings of our own castle.
Yeah, and we have the right to hunt off the land and take care of ourselves and be sovereign individual kind of thing. Instead of being at the king's mercy about whether or not we can provide for our families. Which
and I think there's some present day
has some parallels to the today, Daniel, when governors can decide whose works and jobs are essential or not.
Right. Yeah. And I've been doing this on every episode. Like, oh, Ben-Hur back from 26 AD. Well, it applies to today. Well, so does this one from 1199. Mike, let's get your take on the Google description and Robert's opening here.
Yeah, I thought the Google description was actually pretty good, considering some of them are pretty bad. So I thought it was pretty spot on. I agreed with almost, I would say, everything that Robert said in terms of analysis of the movie. Overall, I enjoyed this movie. I watched it with my wife in the theaters back when it came out, and we watched it again last night in preparation for this podcast. And I remember thinking, I actually kind of like it. So it does have its problems for sure. Lots of inconsistent things that wouldn't have happened, but you'll have that in a movie. So overall, I liked it quite a bit. I was entertained by it, and I I enjoyed the secret libertarian message that you've referenced, and so that's really why I like it the most.
Yeah, it's a movie. When I was watching it, I'm like, I want to like it even more. You know, it's just, it doesn't quite hit all the beats that I want, but it gets close. And it also feels like super ambitious. Like there's so many moving pieces, so many set pieces happening that it gets confusing as to who's doing what and why, what are the motivations, and why is it important to the story. And it almost bears like a second viewing once you sort of know what happens, to then be able to see where those pieces, those chessboard pieces, are moving. Because we've got the Lionheart, he dies, but he's done some horrible atrocity shit against Muslim women and children on the Crusades. And of course, Russell Crowe is like giving the straight scoop, and he's put in the shackles for it, or what is that thing called? Where
The stocks.
In the stocks,
yeah.
Right. So he's like, hey, thanks for your honesty, but by the way, we're gonna kill you for it. And then the King John, who, similar to the Sheriff of Nottingham, of course, famous in the story that we're all familiar with, King John, hardly a part of this. I mean, he's more a part of it than the Sheriff of Nottingham, but he's more of like almost a sympathetic character. Like initially, yeah, he's this petulant kind of jackass. But there's a period of time where you sort of like think that he's maybe trying to do something decent, where he's trying to like make peace with the Scottish lords and band together to resist the French invasion. But of course, as Robert, you of course said, he betrays them at the end. Oddly enough, a politician going back on their words. Who could think that? But again, you know, this is like a reimagining of an origin story of Robin Hood. And in some ways, it's maybe too ambitious. It tries to do too many different things. Like the traditional Robin Hood story, to me, is very small. It's Sherwood Forest, it's Nottingham, it's Maid Marion, it's the King John, and it's the Sheriff of Nottingham. And you have this kind of like conflict between the three people and these small like areas. Here we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about France, we're talking about the English coast, we're talking about London, we're talking about the Scottish Highlands, we're like going all over the place. And we're talking about like a civil war within England, and then we're talking about France invading. Just so much going on. And I think that it's one of those movies that I appreciate the ambition. And Ridley Scott was doing sort of a string of these movies, from Gladiator to Robin Hood to Kingdom of Heaven. And in some ways, you can sort of almost tie them together. They have some like relationship to each other. And I wonder if that was maybe intentional. Mike C, not to be confused with Mike T, our guest tonight, we had him on for Kingdom of Heaven recently, and he's a big fan of Ridley Scott and Michael Mann and Kubrick. But sometimes with great directors, and I consider Ridley Scott a great director, there's an overall narrative that they try to utilize over a period of time. So over the course of several movies. And maybe I'm reading into it, that something that's not really there, but it feels like he's like in that period several times, and he's trying to give this overarching theme. Do you see anything like that, Robert, or am I just like totally blowing smoke here?
Well, that could be. I don't know if that is the case. Certainly, it's art, and art can be subjective, and you can interpret it in multiple ways. So you can see repeating themes or an evolving theme throughout a series of works. I don't think I've never heard of Ridley Scott ever coming out and saying that this is my Cornetto trilogy, this is my medieval epic trilogy, and it's all connected in a certain way. I would say that Ridley Scott, you know, he definitely had his time in the sun, and he has his strong moments. He's not a flawless director, obviously. I mean, all movies are flawed because there's way too many moving parts to have everything, even as a director, to be completely happy with the finished product, of course. And in this one, like you mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts. I wonder if in the theatrical cut was the Wild Kids, was that in the theatrical cut? Because I felt like that was this really kind of extraneous, like, what does this have to do with the rest of the movie? Why are we spending time in the woods all of a sudden with these dirty kids? What does this have to do with the plot? And they kind of came in at the end, like they were part of the final battle for some reason, with like Marion was leading the charge with these dirty kids on these little ponies, which I thought was just hilarious, unintentionally hilarious, because they were like beating grown men in full armor. Are you kidding me? These little kids are beating these full-grown men in chain armor that have probably been the veterans of many battles. Whatever. Okay, I know Hollywood.
Right, and we're supposed to believe that just because Russell Crowe like said in his speech, like, "Oh yeah, I could teach you guys stuff," that all of a sudden they know this.
We don't see it. We don't see him teaching them how to do all those things. Of course, we don't have time. But I just wonder why it was even in there at all. It seemed like it didn't contribute anything to the overall plot, except to give us that final hippie commune scene at the very, very end, where everybody's living and working together and nobody's hungry and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Like, which could have done that without having the little dirty kids.
Yeah, we know, Mike, that's why you like this one, but
that's it.
Did you now you obviously in the theater saw the theatrical cut. When you watched it again the other night, did you watch the unrated? And if so, did you notice what was added and what was different?
No, so we watched the theatrical cut, just iTunes movie rental, which I'm sure was the theatrical cut. And that matches up with the time that you had mentioned earlier. And the little hippie kids were in it. So they were definitely in it. I think what they were going for with that plot line was that there was such dysfunction on this land owned by Cate Blanchett's father-in-law, her deceased husband's father, who is the lord of the manor, or the knight or something like that. And it's so dysfunctional because he's old and decrepit and blind, and no one is running the show. And they're being so overtaxed by the government, and no one is fighting for them. And so what's happening is all these children are either starving or they're running away and learning to live off the land. And so I think what they were that was supposed to bolster the fact that this manor is in just total disarray and nobody is there. And it sets the stage for Russell Crowe to come in and play the hero and organize and right the ship. And then, in the end, once they're declared outlaws, rather than live on the land, or I should say live on the property, they wind up living in the woods, as you said, the little hippie commune, which I think is the worst part of the movie, right? I think the movie is great. I actually really love it, with the exception of that last part, right? This is like 90% of the movie. Hollywood didn't know they were making an argument for freedom. And then in the last 10%, they said, this is, yes, communism. Okay, here we go. Now we're good.
See, that's what we were going for the whole time.
Right. It's like they stumbled, realized what they had done, and said, we better put a communist message in here.
No, not liberty. No. Communism.
Right. Not the government bad.
I think you have to pick one. If you're gonna go with the kid route, then show us a bunch of training montages with the kids and have the kids play some sort of integral part in the defeat of the villain.
That only they can do.
And for some reason, Philip of France is the villain, but he's he's in it for 1-2 minutes. He has 30 seconds of screen time. I don't understand.
Wakes up.
He wakes up and then he says, turn around, never mind. What was even that? The real villain, I guess, is Godfrey.
He's a big old pansy. He wants to take over and then realizes, we're going to lose. Never mind. See ya.
Right, but like Daniel was saying, you got to have them if you're going to go the kid route, then you focus the movie more on the kids and have the kids be the savior along with Robin Hood and why he's taught them. And then that actually makes sense for the kids to be in the movie. Because as it is, there's really no reason for the kids to even be in the film. They don't do anything that is necessary. I mean, they don't teach Robin Hood about anything. He doesn't use any knowledge he got from them to help defeat Godfrey or whatever. So it really is just nonsensical. It's just this big mashup at the end of, all these kind of ideas we were playing with throughout the film. It's really would have been tighter film if you cut the kids out, or you cut out some of the Northern Lords stuff. And then instead of the Northern Lords coming together to beat King Philip, it's Robin Hood and the little kids. And then the king is like, what are you doing with these little kids in this final battle? Your guys are going to get slaughtered. And then Robin Hood's like, guess what? They're going to do something awesome that only the little kids are going to be able to do, and check this shit out.
Boom goes the dynamite.
And then boom. And then
he teaches them to run underneath the horses because they're so small and only they can do that.
Sure, whatever. I don't know. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think I'd probably be laughing either way at whatever ridiculous final medieval battle, because I have plenty of issues with that final battle. It was bad. It was really bad. It didn't follow any of the rules that real medieval final battles did. But anyway, I think a tighter theatrical cut without the kids probably would have been a better film for me.
Yeah, it felt to me as if the resolution at the end of here's the origin of Robin Hood is shoehorned in. It does not fit the rest of the story that we're being told. And it has a lot of moving parts, as I said, and it has some interesting premises, but I think it tries to take on too many things. And despite the length, it's over 3 hours, I think, in the theatrical cut. It's still not enough time to really flesh out all of these ideas that are presented.
It's 2 hours and 20 minutes.
It almost needs to be a miniseries if they're going to go with that many plot lines and that many intricacies. It needs to be a miniseries, not a full-blown television series, but maybe a 4 or 5 part series.
Yeah,
right. I was on board with Godfrey imposing taxation upon the lords, and they're already being bled enough, and then the lords resisting. We don't need the whole Prince Philip thing to be the, Godfrey's a turncoat and he's going to kill his own knights and then replace them with these French knights, and then go and kill people in the villages and the lordships in the north. That just made no sense to me. And the other thing with Godfrey is all of a sudden he's over here and then he magically teleports over there. And it's what the fuck, dude? How are you over there when you were just over here in the last scene? It doesn't make any sense. These are supposed to be concurrent events or sequential events.
I'm glad you noticed that too. I thought I had a stroke. What? Yeah. How did he get there?
Yeah. And it happened twice. It was definitely at the end where he was at the landing site, which is, by the way, the worst possible place I could imagine landing an invading army. This concave bowl where people can rain arrows down upon you, and there's only one escape route. Makes no sense.
Yeah. Medieval landings. I don't know. I'm sure Ridley Scott was completely uninterested in actual medieval landings, because that wouldn't have been your Saving Private Ryan beach landing, dramatic attack. But from what I understand, back in the day, you would just have a bunch of guys in the boats, and they would find some small, quiet place to land where there was no defense, and they would all sneak out, and then you would just have your army there on there. It makes no sense to have this dramatic, contested battle. If you saw a defending army on the beach, you would just be like, all right, everybody pull back, because what can they do? They can shoot some arrows maybe at you a little bit on your boats as you're coming back, and then you could just go down the shore a couple of miles or 20 miles or whatever. Your boats are going to be able to beat their defending army. They're not going to know exactly where you're going to land. It really makes no sense. You would want to fight on land with a superior force. Sun Tzu, fight where you want to fight, not where your opponent wants to fight. That it was just Ridley Scott wanting to have this big dramatic fight that made no damn sense whatsoever. So and that's just outside of the dumb Higgins boats, because they used pitch to seal their boats. I don't think they had the technology to have like
the drop top
ramp that would come down. And then how are they sealing that? How are they even? I don't even know.
Yeah. I
thought I was going to see a tank roll out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some German snipers like shooting them down.
Yeah, where are the pillboxes? Come on, the flamethrowers.
Yeah, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then the whole, I thought what was interesting was, and this sort of alludes to what you were talking about, Mike, halfway through the movie, they're making it about the government is the one enforcing taxation upon the populace by threat of death and violence. And they're just driving that point home, where they're just ransacking these villages and rounding people up and all of these things. And it's all based on, what's your name? How much land do you have? Here's how much you need to pay us. And this is a society that's presented in the film that's already like had several years of bad harvest and already been overtaxed as it was to support these wars in the Crusades for a popular king. They present Lionheart as people wanted to support him, but it was costly to do all this stuff. And then they have this John who's, he's kind of a piece of shit and everyone doesn't respect him. He's kind of a jackass, and people don't want to continue to support what he's doing. And he also had a similar, not similar, but like his take was, hey, all that money you gave to Lionheart, it's gone. I'm the new guy. You got to pay me now. And any debts that Lionheart had incurred, like to pay the army and to pay for things that he had, drawn up on the credit card, King John was just not even going to pay it. And so I thought that was another interesting dynamic. But to your point, it's Hollywood sort of presenting a film where it's the government overspending and overtaxing and over brutalizing the population, and they're really the villains in this. And I thought that was actually quite on the nose, quite accurate.
Yeah, it was. That's why it was so shocking to me, and continues to be shocking. It's like, almost like one of those jokes, like, oh, they said the quiet part out loud. I mean,
oh, like when that lady on CNN with Cuomo was like, yeah, so all these states are opening up, but they're doing it without the vaccine, so we're not going to have that carrot of freedom to offer to people in exchange for the vaccine. What are we going to do? It's like, well,
yeah, and she said, we have a very limited window where we can tie freedom to the vaccine. Whoops. You weren't supposed to say that. That's how I felt about this movie is, sorry, Hollywood, you weren't supposed to admit that it really is the government that steals from people the most.
Yeah, and another thing I liked about this film, and they really did accurately depict kings and their reasoning. I really like the way John goes back on his word at the very, very end. He reasons it out by saying, well, listen, I was put here by God, and all these rights and whatever, they're going to get in my way. And that means they're getting in God's way. So I'm not going to do it. Throughout history, the divine right of kings was very much the excuse used for any kind of behavior they wanted. Going back as far back, at least as far back as the Egyptians, if not farther, they constantly said either they were descended from gods, basically like the son of a god, or they were instilled and put in there by gods. And that's why kings were always like blessed by the Pope or whatever religious figure at the time, the priest,
or they were gods themselves.
Right. So I think that really was accurate and something that a king would absolutely do. Be like, wait a minute, this undercuts my authority, and if this is all true, then I'm really bullshit here, so I can't go through with it. So
What's funny
that was
is
nice.
he's almost making the constitutional argument. Like, well, here's the basic premises we all agree on, and based on those, I can't grant you this because you've
Right.
agreed that I am, thrown
Put here by
God.
God. This contradicts my godhood status, so I can't do this. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a very good point, and in some ways, I see the movie as sort of like being like presenting this divine right of kings as a negative, and in a lot of ways it is, but also in the Hoppian sense, there is certain advantages to having quote unquote skin in the game or a longer time horizon on the effects of your policies that would temper what gets imposed upon people, which makes some of the things we see in this somewhat unrealistic because you would expect an uprising, right? Like the Scottish Highlanders were sort of threatening in this movie. But in Democracy, the God That Fails, Hoppe basically makes the argument that democracy incentivizes a shorter time horizon and more immediate plunder, whereas a monarchist society, and granted, he's not advocating for one, but he's saying in contrast between these two options, this one will do this, and this one will likely do this based on economic laws, that the monarchy would have more incentive to have a preservation of the capital stock and to take better care of the population and the surrounding areas to enhance, the longevity of this system, of the structure. And so what we see in this movie is sort of this presentation that they don't give a fuck about the villagers and the people and the lords. There's like, we've taxed you to death and now we're just going to kill you because you can't pay the taxes. We're going to put you in these, we're going to trap you in these buildings and burn them. Like that's literally what Godfrey was doing to try to collect the tax. He was burning women and children alive. It was like Waco times 10 in just Nottingham alone.
Yeah, I think this is where another caricature aspect of what Hollywood thinks, and what a lot of people think that a monarch would do. And you rightly point out that that Hoppe, he's right on the money. That with a longer time horizon, that a true monarch would probably do a better job. And that's not to say that there's no such thing as an evil monarch. Of course there are. We have history full of evil monarchs and they can do evil things. But it makes no sense that if your livelihood and your wealth and your prosperity depends upon the tax cattle that you claim authority over, why would you kill them?
Yeah,
so,
the golden goose, the golden geese.
Right. So, I mean, they would, and they certainly have in history employed horrific tactics to enforce compliance. So again, not saying that all monarchs are benevolent or that most of them were. Just saying that this seems like a pretty thinly veiled attempt at propaganda.
Yeah. Well,
in favor of, well, democracy must be better than this, right? That's the implied message there, right?
Right.
Well, those stupid rubes, those ignorant Neanderthals who had monarchs, we clearly have it better with our democratic system. That's kind of what I took from it.
Yeah, and one other side point to this is that with a monarch, you know who to blame. And they almost present this in this movie where King John goes up to the Scottish soldiers and is like, here's my sword, use mine. Just kill me if you think that's the right thing to do. But I mean, that's in some ways kind of true. Like when it's a despotic monarch imposing these totalitarian rules upon you, you know who to focus your anger at. But when it's this democratic process, bureaucratic process, it's spread out all over the place. It's like, oh, I'm just following the rules. I'm just following the regulations. I'm just enforcing the laws that are on the books.
Well, it's back to we are the government, right?
Right.
It's Rothbard pointing out that this is an insane notion that would have us all believing that the Nazis that the Jews committed suicide under the Nazis. Because if we are the government, then I suppose the Jews committed suicide.
Stands to
Indeed.
reason.
Oh, wait, we're not allowed to bring that up anymore, right?
No, of course. Well, only if we're talking about Republicans being bad, then it's okay.
Yeah, then it's okay.
Yeah. And I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying, like, hey, I'm an equal opportunity hater of political parties and affiliations.
Bingo.
So, Robert, let's take us through some of your notes here, because we're gonna have to start winding down pretty soon. It's kind of amazing how we start talking and then all of a sudden it's almost an hour later.
Yeah. So, okay, here we go. I got quite a few notes here. We've already been over some of it, but here we go. The first thing I wrote down was a quote by Robin Longstride, and he's hanging out with Maid Marion, and she mentions that all the deer in the forest are the property of the king. And Robin goes, if it's illegal for a man to fend for himself, how then can he be a man of his own right? So that's, if you're going to deny somebody the ability to fend for themselves, much like there are parallels to today.
Maybe he was an essential hunter, and that was an essential deer.
Might have been. But let's talk a little bit about the confused messaging, I want to say, in this film. I don't know if you guys interpreted it this way, but I know I did. At one point during the raping and the pillaging and the looting of Nottingham by the French, one of the guys who's going to get his rape on with Maid Marion, he goes, how many acres do you own? And she's like, 5,000. And he's like, oh, sweet, I'm going to go get my rape on with you. And then at one point, and he's like about to rape her, and he goes, nobody should be able to own 4,000 acres. And she goes, well, it's actually 5,000. But if that's the message that's delivered by a villain character, he's saying basically a communistic message, right? That nobody should be able to own X amount. It's a very anti-capitalist message that there's nobody that should be this rich. You're basically, the movie is demonizing communists, the communist idea that, there shouldn't be these rich people. But then at the end, you've got this hippie commune where everybody's taking care of each other and there's no money and nobody's trading anything and, this kind of thing. So I don't know what you guys took within that, but for me, it just kind of smacked of typical Hollywood not having a clear message or even understanding these concepts that they're playing around with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I found that very confused. And I think that he was making a point that, like, oh, you don't actually have 5,000 acres anymore. You only have 4,000. And that's our starting negotiating point. I'm about to take more after I rape you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that is what he was getting at. I actually have a little bit of a different take on this part of it. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second.
He is an old man.
No, yeah,
right. Hey, it's late. It's almost 9:00 my time. It's time for bed.
Welcome to the club, buddy.
The sun is down.
Boy.
What am I doing still awake?
Yeah, right. So yeah, I didn't think it was that confusing of a message. And here's why. I saw it more of an ominous warning sign. I mean, really, and forgive me, but I can't help but analyze these things in light of the craziness that's been going on for the last 12, 13 months. At a certain point, if you continue to refuse to go along with whatever the government is telling you have to do, whether it be masking or vaccines or whatever, in short order, you're not going to be of the privileged class. You're not even going to be of the normal class. You're going to be such low class that you will be relegated to living outside of the comfort areas. Now, I don't think that means immediately my family and I are going to move into tents in the forest and live off of, poached deer. I'm not to that point yet, but I do think it shows a little bit of continuity with the storyline to say that once the government decides that you are persona non grata, you will be relegated to not attending sports events and not traveling internationally and not attending the nice restaurants and not going to museums and plays and theater and other such things. And so to me, I thought that actually was a fairly consistent message. What say you?
So the England social credit system doesn't...
The English vax passport.
Yeah, I mean, of course, they didn't see this coming. I'm not saying that he was clairvoyant and saw this coming. But in that context, I don't see it as so much of a contradiction, right? The storyline goes that, they were not willing to pay the taxes and therefore they were declared outlaws and they were ostracized. Well, I think that goes right along with the progression of how the story played out and how it could play out in the coming months.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what you're saying. I mean, in some ways, it's like the Willie Sutton quote, like, well, why did you rob the bank of the money? Well, because that's where the money was. And of course, that's where the government taxes people. It's because, well, that's where the money is, or at least that's where they think it is. And as presented in this film, like these estates have already been taxed enough. And there was also taxation by the church. If we recall, a lot of the grain had been taken by the church, and Friar Tuck comes in and is like, sort of gets in cahoots with Robin Hood to steal back the grain that was going to some abbey, like, some far-flung place away from Nottingham, because they had 5 or 6 bad harvests in a row. So it's not even that these estates, these lords, were doing that well. They were having hard times and being taxed by the king to support the Crusades. And then King John wanted to up those taxes. And then the church was also taking a big cut. So and we have a lot of like competing things that are sort of imposing upon the supposed rich who really aren't as rich as everyone thinks that they are. So there's a lot of perceptions at play, at least as presented in the movie. And I think that also plays into some of the things we were talking about in the pre-show bonus content, where there's perceptions in the narrative that more people are going along with what we're being presented with than actually are. And so when you come across people who sort of see through it, you sort of have that like that shared moment and realize that we're not alone, So that's sort of another relation to present day. But to your point about like restrictions on what they can do, I can see some parallels to it, though it's a much more crude form in this movie because it's 1100 AD, 1099 AD, a few years before the Magna Carta, which is sort of alluded to in this towards the end. And of course, King John reneges on it, which I'm sure Robert wants to go on a little diatribe about that.
Well, I do want to go through a little bit more of my notes here. I do have a few more things. So at one point when Robin is finding out who he is, and he's talking to the Baron of Nottingham, and the Baron of Nottingham is telling him that his father was a stonemason, and he was also like this philosopher, and he had these great ideas, these radical ideas. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but this is what I wrote down when I watched the film. I wrote down, Robin's dad thought that kings needed their subjects as much as their subjects needed their king. I think that's the quote from the Baron, the adopted father guy, about Robin's actual father. So his radical idea is that kings actually need their subjects. I don't understand how that is radical because everybody knows that kings need the subjects from the taxes. But if he's saying that subjects need their king because human beings need leadership, well, then the anarchist in me says yes, human beings need leadership, and it comes from many places. Laws, books, leaders in thought, speakers, elders, wherever you can find knowledge, you get leadership. What you don't need is some tyrant or someone threatening you, treating you like a child, stealing from them and telling them that it's good for you. You don't need that. So I'm not exactly sure. I don't know. For me, it's a little bit confused. Maybe it's because to say that people need a king, they need that they're getting some sort of a benefit. I mean, I know that the movie kind of plays up this idea of a kingdom being a great thing. And I understand that people look to governments for protection from outside attacks, and never mind the fact that you're getting attacked from within all the time. But there's always this extraneous threat of invasion from the barbarians or from France or wherever.
The freaky
usually
dicky Dutch.
Usually
It's
France.
always the French.
But it's always, terrorism, whatever the enemy of the day is, it's always an excuse for more government, more theft. You understand what I'm saying here, Daniel?
Yeah, I think so. And I was about to make a very illuminating point, and it's escaped me now. But
Excellent.
what the fuck was I talking about? But yeah, I think that there is a certain amount of the population that does need leadership, because they're going to be the NPC style sort of unthinking masses. And that's sort of one of the beautiful yet terrible aspects of democracy, right? Like, if you can propagandize enough people to want a certain thing or think a certain way, then democracy is your friend. You can manipulate it however you want. So if you have the controls of those levers, then you sort of have a de facto, like, by proxy totalitarianism. As long as you can manipulate the masses sufficiently enough to get what you want to be desirable by the masses, then you can basically get any policy that you desire. And I think that's what we see in present day. And I'm going way off the rails of what I thought I was going to say here, but I think that the movie does have the sort of this confused message, like you're saying, and so a lot can be read into this. But King John is he's sort of the opposite of the Lionhearted, where people actually wanted to support Richard, even though he was doing terrible things, like we talked about earlier. He was slaughtering women and children in the Muslim countries in Palestine and whatnot. But then we have King John, who's like this petulant jackass who won't listen to reason at all, or will only do things for his direct benefit. So he'll say the right thing in the moment, but then like renege on it immediately. So he was very much a pragmatic, in the moment, willing to put on whatever face and tell anyone what they needed to hear to get what he wanted. And so I thought that was pretty appropriate as far as like how most politicians will behave. Like, they'll say what you want to hear. They'll give you good rhetoric when they want to get elected or pass something, but then they'll go against it. We were talking earlier about Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, who's been really good on the lockdowns and all of these things. And she gave a speech at CPAC, which had tons of great rhetoric. I mean, Reagan had great rhetoric, like freedom this, freedom that, like individuality, consequences and pulling yourself up and earning things. Well, she had, a similar speech like that sounded great. But then she also, I believe, recently vetoed a bill that was passed by the South Dakota legislature decriminalizing marijuana. Well, that flies in the face of everything that she just says in this speech at CPAC. So it's, it's the typical thing. And I don't know if it's because people are consciously aware of these logical contradictions or that they just don't care. And I got to think that it's probably that they just don't care, or they don't recognize it at all. They think they're doing a good thing, but they don't put two and two together.
It could be. I don't know the familiars or the details of that particular bill. I mean, it might have been that it decriminalized marijuana and it also spent $8.4 billion on somebody's pet giant turtle project or something. You never know with these government projects. I have two more final notes. One is just real quick. I don't think a battlefield is the best place to make out with your girlfriend. Just saying. I just don't know if it's the best. It's probably the most romantic. I'll grant you that. By far the most romantic spot, but it just seemed a little dangerous at the time.
Yeah,
Maybe
what is
it's
it?
me.
Is this 2010? I mean, it seems pretty woke to be having her have this women empowered moment of like she shows up on the battlefield when she's supposed to not be there, and he's just like cool with it.
Yeah. He's just
I don't
like, yeah,
know.
whatever. All right, lead that battle. You go, girl.
Right. Like, yeah, very woke. Like a man of this time and era would say, oh, you're here in armor on a horse and you're going to fight in battle with me? Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this is the time
No
when
way.
when
No way.
when her father-in-law had to pretend that Russell Crowe was his son so that she wouldn't lose title to the land. You know, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And by the way, wife, if you're watching this, if you show up on some battlefield, I'm going to send you home. I'm sorry.
Get back in the kitchen.
You beat
Make me a
too.
sandwich. All right, and my final note, guys, is when Russell Crowe comes in and saves the day against the Frenchman in Nottingham, and they have won the day, and they've got all the Frenchmen rounded up. Russell Crowe needs to find out where and when Prince Philip is going to land. And he goes all Jack Bauer on this one French dude. And he tortures him. But what he doesn't, I don't know if he realizes it. I'm sure this scene was made this way for time, maybe reasons, but it doesn't make any sense. Like the Frenchman is standing up against this wall, but all his French friends and compatriots can hear him as he's talking. And he could easily be lying. What you need to do is you need to torture each one of these French guys individually, separately. Maximize the torture, but then you'll know you're going to get the truth. Because you just torture one French guy, you could get any answer. He could have said Barney the Flippin' Dinosaur on Wednesday the 14th in your butthole, and he would have been, oh, okay, we're out of here. We got to go check out my butthole because that's where Philip is landing. It's just, it made no sense for him to just immediately trust that guy's answer.
Right. Yeah. This you're talking about the cop tactic where you put people in separate interrogation rooms and you tell them that the other one turned on the other, and you lie to them to get him to divulge the truth. Mike, is there anything to that?
At least you get multiple, and if they all had the same lie, you know, that could have been the case. Okay, everybody agrees. We're all going to tell them that it's actually in this other place. Maybe that's true. Maybe. But the fact that you're just going to torture one guy and take his word for it, I don't know. I don't think torture works that good. What I'm arguing for is more torture.
More torture. I mean,
Exactly.
coming from a voluntarist perspective, I would expect you to argue for more torture.
Exactly. Thank you.
You know, I was of the mind that how would they even know where they're landing in 1099 AD? Like, it seems like it would be a little bit more difficult to choose a position of your landing.
And wouldn't it be a little bit more compartmentalized? Like maybe the main bad guy, the scar-faced, I forget his name all of a sudden.
Godfrey.
Godfrey would know where it is, and maybe one or two other guys. But you don't think like just some rando dude in the army would necessarily know. I don't know.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to be any of his business. I mean, he's already there.
That was some pretty good luck. They found that one guy who knew.
That one guy, and he told him right away. As
Yeah.
soon as he said, I only got one arrow left, and you know where it's going, I guess.
But into the boys.
I mean, anyway, it's a lot of tropes in this movie. It was still a lot of fun. I like a good medieval war type film, even though, man, that final battle, it just, none of it made any sense from any kind of military tactics
The weird thing is,
sensibility.
it's supposed to be this grand spectacle at the end, but it's kind of a letdown because it's actually like quite small. It's
Yeah.
just like at this bluff, and I don't know.
And they
Doesn't
fight a couple of the guys that got off the boats, but nobody else.
yeah. So it doesn't seem to have the gravitas that you would think this epic battle would entail. But I don't know. It's a little bit weird. I gotta say, my favorite adaptation of Robin Hood, even the traditional story or this somewhat prequel origin story, I think it still comes down to the Disney version with the fox, and then the Carrie Ewell's version, Robin Hood Men in Tights, Mel Brooks. That's probably number 2. This one's probably at number 3. Sorry, Kevin Costner. But Kevin Costner movie's right under this. It's pretty close.
There are things I like about this movie more than those other ones you're talking about. This at least had a grittier aspect to it. Like, it was very much realism based, except for all the fantastical Hollywood BS stuff. But it was very much, he didn't have like the magical archery skills, except for the very end when he was like shooting between the guys' fingers.
Very end,
from who knows where. But
he just shoots it up at a random angle and it's perfect.
Yeah.
And the Merry Men, almost useless in this movie. So they almost have like barely more like significance than the sheriff of Nottingham in this one.
Yeah, but that big dude, he's funny.
Little John?
Funny. Yeah.
Yeah, Little John. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, Little John. I thought well casted in this movie. I mean, he's a goofball and provided some good comic relief.
Yeah, I wish their personalities had come out a little bit more. But if it's Robin Hood and his band of merry men, I get it. That wasn't the movie they were trying to make here. It was more of an origin story, and maybe they come into their personalities later. But I don't know. Most of the characters seemed a little bit generic. Even Friar Tuck, who was all about beekeeping and did a few things here and there, and he was definitely a unique character. He didn't really have a whole lot that set him apart from random generic medieval guy. I mean, none of them really did. When I think back on it,
I think what you're saying is you wanted more of this. Like, I like the world that's presented by Ridley Scott here. There's not enough meat on each of these characters. Like,
I think it's butter over too much bread.
It's sort of like thin. They're presented, but they're not really fleshed out.
They needed to do this in the era of streaming serial television. They would have had 3 to 5 great Netflix seasons.
Yeah, there's plenty here. There's all kinds of different characters to play with, a bunch of different plot lines to play with. You could have an entire season where the finale is the invasion by Philip, or you could have a bunch of episodes set in the forest with the little kids and have a bunch of different adventures. And then the Northern Lords could be a whole season plot angle. There could be all kinds of stuff.
As an interesting, this is just coming to my mind now. Do you think movies like this, of this time frame, and that have too much going on but really have good ideas, are what lead, along with the technology, but are what lead to the onslaught of this serial dramatic television that you can binge watch season by season? Do you think this is maybe like the genesis of that?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely, I mean, I know Game of Thrones came out and blew everything out of the water because it was just too big of a story. There's no way you could turn. Remember when they were first talking about developing Game of Thrones, and George Martin was like, well, maybe you could turn one book into, a movie. So you'd have like 3 or 4 movies. But even then it would be just the highlights, barely any of the character content. And you'd be just cutting out massive amounts of everything.
Yeah.
And then when it got picked up by HBO, and even then, and I still think that the HBO series is quite well done, except for that final season. It still leaves out entire characters, entire plot lines are just chopped for just
And it still had a ton going on.
Yeah.
It still had a way ton going on.
Yeah.
To
And
the point
you look
where
at
it was a joke where it was like, now who's this guy again? I don't even remember.
Yeah, and you look at the failure of the recent Star Wars movies and the success of the Mandalorian, right? And you see the ability of the Mandalorian to say, we're going to do 2 complete seasons on this one story. And then there's going to be a whole nother story. And we're going to develop some other characters and we're going to develop more. And that's fascinating to me to think about a movie like this from 2010 where maybe this should have been a TV series or a streaming series or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot here. Like, it's not Game of Thrones amount of stuff, but it's probably like a mini series amount of stuff. Like, I could see this being a 6 or 8 hour mini series to fully get what we're
just what we have
building
here.
to.
You could
build
all
on it
this out and turn this into seasons worth of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
More
And
has
then-
been done with less.
And that's just getting
For
us
sure.
to the traditional Robin Hood story.
Right.
Yeah, this is just the origin story. Then you could play around with all kinds of stuff in the Sherwood Forest adventures with actually having the Sheriff of Nottingham being a terrifying force instead of just this joke character.
Right. I mean, maybe they just consider Prince of Thieves the the next natural movie that people would watch after watching this to continue on with the story. Because of course you got the great Alan Rickman.
Great, Alan Rickman.
Hello.
It's a spoon because it'll hurt more.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
great. He's great. Also great in Die Hard.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, we've been going super long already. It's what we tend to do here. We've been trying to make the episodes like an hour, and they're always like hour and a half, hour and 45. Just happens. But Robert, why don't you lead us off with a final summary review and how many arrows you got in your quiver for this one?
All right, so Robin Hood, starring Russell Crowe, Ridley Scott, 2010. I remember when it first came out, it wasn't very well received. I think it's probably better than I expected it to be. It's not super amazing. I think it's a little flat. I don't think there's enough character here for any real audience member to really glom onto anything. Like if you go, remember Robin Hood with Russell Crowe? There's like, I remember there being a movie, but I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember any awesome scenes in it. There's nothing really to hang your hat on in this film of like that signature scene where like, this is why we're making this movie, because of this moment. We made all this movie lead up to this, and this is what everybody's going to remember, this badass scene. But there really isn't anything like that. It's a standard kind of stock medieval drama with a bunch of fighting that is somewhat decent. Cate Blanchett is all right. There's some decent acting going on, but I don't know if the characters are really given a whole lot of meat. I think Oscar Isaac's pretty hams it up as King John pretty decently. But it's a movie that tries to do too much. I've said many, many times on this podcast, I'll say it again. I prefer a simple story told in an interesting way instead of a complex story told in some kind of convoluted way. It's not necessarily super convoluted. I followed the story just fine, but I thought that there were more elements than there needed to be to tell a good story. It seemed like they were just throwing stuff in there that didn't necessarily need to be in there. So, I don't know if it's just Ridley Scott going a little bit crazy, going a little bit silly in his old age. Then he went on to make those weird aliens movies that nobody liked. So, like Prometheus and whatever. I'm not a fan of those movies either. So what are you going to do? I would give this. It's either 6.5 arrows or 7 arrows. I'm going to go 7 arrows. There's 7 arrows in my quiver on this one. I still enjoy it. I don't know if I'll ever come back to this or if I'd come back to it anytime. I would probably put it on in the background when I'm doing something else.
Yeah, I don't see a reason to watch it again. I kind of agree. Like, there's not like a defining moment that we're building up to that's like, I'm watching this for this reason. It's not like Ben-Hur where we're watching it to get to that chariot race.
Yeah, there is no real defining moment where you're just so satisfying. Oh, I'm so glad I watched this. It's just like, oh, it's just all gray. It's all gray. It's not like leading up with peaks and valleys.
Right, but it's also a thing where I want more, you know? Like we were talking about earlier, like I like what I see, but I don't get enough of it.
Yeah, I think it sets up an interesting world. It's very much a gritty, medieval, Game of Thronesy world with, political intrigue and, petty character motivations and machinations and that kind of thing. It just doesn't do any of it particularly well or very interesting. Like in Game of Thrones, you had like the Red Wedding. You're not going to get like a moment where you're crying your eyeballs out in this movie. There's nothing like that where you're just like feel betrayed or...
Yeah, you haven't had time to develop it.
You don't have time to develop it, you're right. But there's also none of that really... I mean, maybe it's just a matter of time. But there really isn't any of those moments where you're just thrilled or saddened or anything. It just kind of happens and you just kind of watch it. But yeah. I still liked it. So
7 arrows for Robert. So Mike, this was a movie that you brought up a couple of years ago and we finally have gotten to it. So I got to think that you got a good summary review and a good number of arrows for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with my number of arrows. I give it an 8. I've said it before several times. I really enjoyed the movie. It does suffer from the problems that we've all mentioned. I think chief among them is the fact that there's so much here that's appealing that isn't developed, right? There's complexity here, probably too much complexity. There's good characters here, underdeveloped. But overall, again, I give it an 8 out of 10. And I probably would watch it again.
As you did for this.
I did, and I liked it. But, I mean, look, disclaimer, it could be because we get so few date nights. The kids were asleep, and my wife and I got to watch a movie last night. And even though it's in our house, that's a date night. So it was great. Yeah.
Now, you are more advanced than I because a movie of this length, it takes us 2 or 3 nights to watch. And I've tortured Robert with near 4-hour movies for the past several weeks that have taken us 4 or 5 nights to watch.
Oof.
So
well, this was a necessity. It's a busy life, and last night around 6:30, I looked at my wife and said, "I still got to watch this movie before tomorrow." And she goes, "Well, cue it up."
All right. See, that's how you know you found the right one.
Yep. She's a good one.
A movie that I'm going to give 5 arrows
Ooh.
in my quiver. I know it sounds terrible. I'm like kind of giving it a bad review, but it's mostly because I want so much more and I expect almost more out of Ridley Scott. This is convoluted in a way where you can follow it if you were to read it in a script, but how they present it on screen, it's like all over the place. There's so many different villains, and it's not the villains that you are familiar with from the Robin Hood stories of lore. I think that there's a lot that is interesting and could have been explored further. And so that kind of leaves me sort of wanting, sort of like what Robert was saying earlier. I think Ridley Scott's very talented and he's trying to tell a bigger story. He's biting off a lot more than can be chewed in just 3 hours. And it gets to be a little bit overwhelming. I think that the director's cut probably helps flesh it out a little bit. I don't know what the nuances and the differences are between them, but I know that Ridley Scott has been a director who's been thwarted by studios in the past. where they have cut out significant portions of movies to where they don't make a lot of sense, similar to what happened with Zack Snyder with Batman v Superman and Justice League. I know Kingdom of Heaven, many scenes were added that helped to bring the narrative structure of that to make more coherent sense. And I think that's probably what happened with Robin Hood. And I don't know, again, I don't know what those connective things were that weren't there in the theatrical cut, but it's also a movie that it didn't like stand out. I couldn't tell you that I remember, Russell Crowe as Robin Hood, except for doing it for this episode. So it didn't really seem to have a big cultural mark on things, but it does have enough going for it that it makes me do wish that there was more to it. Of course, Ridley Scott's much older now and probably not going to be doing much more of this type of material, but I think that overall it's a good suggestion, and it does have a lot of really good elements, like Mike, you were saying earlier, where Hollywood sort of made a movie that they didn't really realize what the message was that they were making, that it's actually showcasing that it's the government itself that is really the true threat to the citizens. I mean, they do sort of throw in England might fall if we don't all band together, but that sort of seems almost like tacked on at the end to give it a little bit more of a setting for that final ridiculous battle scene over at the beach. So I'm still unfortunately gonna give it a low score of the 5 arrows in the quiver. It's not a mark against you, Mike, at all. It's just that there's not enough here to have it be a complete story for me.
All right. Well, good scores, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
All right, not so bad. And Mike, I hope that you can stick around a little bit longer because we do some more bonus content for the Patreon people. We call it Kathleen Turner Overdrive, and people can go to lastnighters.com/Patreon for that. And Robert, we're going to do a perfect world next week with our friend Pete Quinones of the Kevin Costner movies. So in a way, it's sort of a continuation of this story where the Kevin Costner movie is a continuation of this Robin Hood origin. And we're doing a Kevin Costner movie with our Kevin Costner guy, Pete Quinones, of the Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast, doing the Kevin Costner movie, A Perfect World, which is one of Costner's better movies. I mean, he was a big deal.
Is it?
In the 90s. And not all of his movies are good. Not many of them are great.
I don't even think Kevin Costner debates that. What is the premise of this film? I don't even know.
Well, I haven't seen it in so long. It came out probably 20 odd years ago. And I think he's sort of playing a villain. He's like an ex-con who encounters a young kid who, through their wacky machinations, the kid teaches him some life lessons. I think. Okay. I could be totally wrong on this.
All right.
It's been so long.
If it's 90 minutes, I'm giving it an 8.
Okay. I think it's longer than 90 minutes. So it's probably in a 7.5 territory for you. But
we'll see. But anything lower than 4 hours is a step in the right direction.
That's right. Yeah. Just by default, just a relative sense of, all right, the last 3 movies have been 3 or 4 hours long. As long as it's close to 2, it's automatically getting bonus points.
That's right.
That's understandable. Totally understandable. All right. Well, so that's the movie we're doing next week. And of course, people can check out that and also the pre-show and post-show bonus content at lastnerds.com/Patreon. Mike, we were on with you a couple of years ago for an interview with you. And I felt like the interview we just did with Keith Knight of Don't Tread on Anyone, we sort of repeated a lot of our origin story that we went over with you. But we get to talk about movies in the Keith Knight one. So I would recommend to people they check out both. So I'll put, of course, all of that on the show notes page. And I'm actually surprised that, Mike, we haven't had you on for a movie before this. And it's because it took so long for us to actually get this together, though we have done shows with you in the past when we did the the State of the Libertarian Union talk show,
Yeah.
which of course had a great acronym, and it got shut down on YouTube with no explanation whatsoever several years ago. And I wonder if it had to do with some of the discussions we had about things in Parkland, Florida, and tactics and things that should have been done instead. I kind of have suspicions around that, but
I think it was the acronym. I'm not kidding.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe. Anyway, it's been a lot of fun having you on, and we will be back next week with the great Pete Quinones for A Perfect World with Kevin Costner, of course. And we will see you guys all next week for that one. And I will say good night from last night, everyone. And I just got to find the right button to sign us off. Peace out, everyone. Good night. All right, so we're going to continue the transmission for just a little bit longer on the Actual Anarchy podcast. I've had like 4 beers, and it's Tuesday, so I might have a problem. I don't know. But, Mike, one of the things I wanted to ask you was you were a police officer, and you left. So you were sort of in the role of the sheriff of Nottingham, not, particularly in this story, but in, the traditional Robin Hood story. And I was just curious if you would, let us know, like, what was the thing that sort of drove you to choose to no longer do that? Because I think that's a pretty important story.
Yeah, I wish it would be a great thing if I could sit here and tell you the reason I stopped being a police officer is because I had a libertarian awakening, and I decided that what I was doing was wrong and immoral. I can't tell you that story. That would be lying. Mostly what it was is that the work conditions were bad. The work itself started to seem more and more futile. And I wasn't really treated well. And not me personally, by the way. None of the officers that I worked with were treated very well. And in fact, that department where I worked had an enormously high turnover rate. At one point in time, we calculated within 10 years, a department of 45 full-time officers had lost over 100 people, which is astronomical. When most departments, their retention rate is very high. This department, it was a lot of things. Now, there was a philosophic problem that was brewing, but it hadn't manifested fully yet. And the way that it did manifest at the time was some heated arguments and discussions that I would have with my superiors on why we do things and where we get the authority to do certain things and why we waste time on other things. And couldn't we accomplish the same goals without issuing citations or arresting or getting search warrants or, stuff like that. And I think I did it with a level of respect to where I didn't create enemies. I think when I left voluntarily, I think I left on good terms. So, it's not like I woke up one day and said, I'm a libertarian and I can't be a police officer anymore. It was more like a confluence of 5 or 6 different things that led me to believe that I just wasn't really all that happy. And not to be too long-winded, there's another really important aspect here, and that is I really didn't like who I was becoming. And that's probably the biggest part. I mean, as a police officer, you're trained to think about people a certain way, and you live your life a certain way, and it's very suspicious of everybody, and it's very superior. You get a superiority complex. At least I did. Okay, maybe some people can do that job and not develop that. I don't know. I know I was starting to look at the world really pessimistically and really suspect that anyone who looked a certain way was guilty of something, and it was up to me to find what it was. And I just didn't like that about myself. I was really starting to dislike who I was becoming. And I was at the point where 5 years in, that's break point, really. You either stay for a career or you leave at that point. If you stay any longer than that, you're so invested in your retirement or your pension that you're not going to leave that. You're going to stick it out. And I know so many and knew so many officers who were in for 15 years and they only had 10 more to go. And there's no way they were going to leave, but they were bad cops because they didn't care about the job. They were, beaten down by the system, but they just stuck around for another 10 years to get the pension. And so at 5 years, I had a decision to make. And I was dating at the time my current wife. Boy, I shouldn't say current like that. That sounds terrible. I did not mean that, honey. Don't worry, she's never going to watch. But yeah, I had a conversation with her and said, what do you think about me leaving police work and getting a different job? And we knew what the new job would be because I had a buddy who was going to get me in with this company, and we knew that it meant moving. And so that's why I really had to talk to her. And I said, are you okay with me leaving this job and you moving with me? And she said yes to both. And that was it.
Nice.
Now, anytime you work with a group of people, I know Daniel, he works remotely, so he probably doesn't have this experience. But when you work closely with a group of people, you generally get a sense of their political views, whether you want to know it or not. What would you say was the general disposition politically of most officers? Is it pretty diverse? Does it lean one way or another? Were there some libertarian type cops that you kind of took cues from, or what was that like?
I think police officers are a subset of the population at large, meaning the percentages you're going to find in the general population, you're going to find in a police department. Now, that's going to vary from city to city and town to town. I was in a rural town, but a college town, so heavily, heavily liberal. And even in a heavily liberal college town, I would say it was a pretty representative group in terms of political opinion. There were a couple people who were pretty libertarian. Most of my best friends were uber liberal, and we argued politics all the time. And the funny thing was, even though personally they were uber liberal, and I shouldn't even say liberal, I should say like leftist, on the job, they tended to agree with me with, what the hell are we doing arresting these people for this stuff? Like, really, what good are we doing? Now, that completely different when you start to talk about guns and DUI. The liberals thought every gun violation was saving a life and every DUI arrest was saving a life instantaneously. Whereas some of the more libertarian people started to see this really isn't doing any good.
Right. Well, I appreciate you sharing that portion of the story. Now, there was another thing that you'd brought up that was in the pre-show bonus content that your wife had noticed in this movie. So I wonder if we could touch on that real briefly before we wind down and then get into the actual Kathleen Turner Overdrive, because I thought it was interesting and I didn't want to only have it in the bonus content.
Yeah, not a problem at all. Again, this was a point my wife brought up when we watched last night, but she said, in the age of sequels, why do we think it is that this movie doesn't have a sequel? I mean, it's the origin story of Robin Hood. You would think like Batman Begins and the movies that followed, you have an origin story that is done up like a medieval epic. Wouldn't there be blockbuster sequels after this? Now, an easy answer would be is it didn't do very well, so they're not going to invest the money. That could very well be the answer. But another possible answer is that they made the movie and then watched it and realized, oh no, we've created a character that hates the government. And we've created a character that makes the point that all of these government programs are really the enemy, and that the true hero in the story is the one who fights for freedom and low taxation and stealing money back from the government, getting the government off their back. I tend to think it's the latter. I think that played a big part. I don't think that sequels were ever in a possibility with this storyline.
I could see what you're saying, but I could also see the intention of this movie being an origin, and thus all they need to do is get you to the point where Robin Hood is in Sherwood Forest with his band of merry men, and then just the canon takes over from there.
Yeah, I could see this the sequel going full on commie, being like, there's these rich guys, they got too much money, they're just taking it from everybody else. We need to get it back to the poor people, and that's why they're poor, because the rich people are exploiting them. I could see that going real well with today's Hollywood, and they would shift over to that storyline in a heartbeat and not even pretend like this movie existed.
Sure. And this is a point Dave Smith brings up very well and consistently, which is, for people like us, inconsistency keeps you awake at night. You know, I'm going to butcher this point, but this is what he says a lot. But it doesn't bother leftists, the inconsistency. They just don't care. They could make a movie like Robin Hood and then do exactly what you just said and go full on commie for, you know, Robin Hood 2 or whatever the heck they'd call it. And we'd be sitting here screaming and saying, it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent. Don't you see it? And they just wouldn't care. It doesn't faze them at all. So you could be right. But I thought it was an interesting point.
Yeah.
No, definitely. If they had stayed with this storyline, I absolutely concede that I could see why they wouldn't want to continue on with this. Like, they were like, this is way too libertarian of a movie. We don't do that around here. That was a big oopsie on our part. I don't know how this one got past quality control. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Robert, you make me want to revise my score and give it a few more arrows in the quiver.
Hey, you still can, buddy. You can give it a sixer.
All right, yeah.
Six pack of beer.
All right. Bonus content, people. I'm giving it a well, you're not quite bonus content, but you're our anarchist audience. So I'm going to throw one more arrow in the quiver here. It's going to be a sixer tonight.
Very well. Very good, sir. Very good.
All right. Well, Mike, it's been a pleasure having you on. Now, is your content still available? Can people listen to it? Finding it somewhere at Battle for Liberty, like on the Apple Podcast, or how's that work?
So actually the way I set it up, if you go to battleforliberty.com, I still own the domain, and there's a very tiny little piece of text that says the podcast is no longer in production, but the archive is available on Stitcher, and a link is there. So all of the episodes are still on Stitcher, and you can access it at battleforliberty.com.
Okay, well, I highly recommend it. I recall that the shows I listened to were very good, and especially the show that Robert and I were on.
It's the best one.
Probably my favorite one. I mean, it was like so good.
Consistently rated 10 out of 10. Can recommend.
All right. Well, thank you. And so people do check that out, battleforliberty.com, and also come back next week to join us with Pete Quinones for A Perfect World, another Kevin Costner flick. And if you like what we do here, check out our Patreon. Go to actualanarchy.com/Patreon. You can also subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or on the old YouTube. We're probably going to get kicked off Facebook pretty soon. And, probably YouTube for that matter as well. I don't know what the Thought Police are going to do and where we're going to be relegated to after that. But you can probably generally find us on most podcast locations. And that should stick around for a little bit longer. Though I did see an article saying that there's some loophole in hate speech with podcasts, and they need to crack down on that. So we'll probably get in trouble for having opinions at some point down the road. But anyway, Mike, it's been a lot of fun, and I hope your podcasting days aren't over. If you want to kick off another one, we'd love to have you back and promote it, or we'll just have you back just in general, because it's been a lot of fun.
Love to come back.
That sounds awesome, and I'd love to have you back over here. I mean, if you're ever in the old neighborhood,
I'll let you know. I'll give you more than a day's notice this time.
Perfect. Well, I'll still have you come over here. So.
It's kind.
All All right. Well, so this has been episode 228 of the show. You can find the show notes and more at actualanarchy.com/228. We'll be back next week with Pete Quinones for A Perfect World. We'll say goodnight from last night, everyone, and maximum freedom. Peace out.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.